The world did not expect this. In Ouagadougou, a single announcement shook Washington and echoed across Africa. I order the CIA to leave Burkina Faso. With those words, Captain Ibrahim Traoré transformed a quiet suspicion into a...
It began with a deadline, 48 hours. That's all Captain Ibrahim Traoré gave the CIA to pack up and vanish from Burkina Faso. What the US called a security base, he exposed as a spy nest watching his nation, not protecting it. In one stroke, Traoré didn't just expel agents, he expelled an era of quiet control. The question burning through Africa tonight is simple. Has the age of Western supervision finally met its match in Ouagadougou? Let's find out. The order came not through rumor or leak, but in the voice of a soldier who has long stopped asking for permission. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before his nation and announced a decision that would ricochet through every intelligence corridor from Washington to Langley. All U.S. intelligence personnel, including CIA operatives, have 48 hours to leave Burkina Faso. No diplomatic preamble, no soft phrasing about restructuring partnerships. Just a clock, ticking loud enough to be heard across the Atlantic. In a region where foreign presence is often normalized under the banner of counterinsurgency, Traoré's message was nothing short of revolutionary. It wasn't just a logistical order to pack up equipment, it was a statement of identity. For decades, African nations have tolerated what they were told were security collaborations, only to discover that these bases often acted as eyes and ears for foreign capitals. But now, a young captain from Ouagadougou has drawn the line. According to Burkina Faso officials, the so-called U.S. Security Cooperation Facility, located on the outskirts of the capital, was not what it appeared to be. It had the infrastructure of an intelligence command node, aerial signal intercepts, encrypted communications antennas, and restricted rooms that even Burkina Faso military personnel were not allowed to enter. Local officers reportedly grew suspicious after noticing unusual transmission activity during national security meetings. When these patterns were traced, they led straight back to foreign systems. What was marketed as a joint command center, Traoré's government now claims, was in fact a full-scale surveillance hub not designed to protect Burkina Faso, but to monitor it. Washington's response, at least initially, was one of denial. State Department spokespeople reiterated that all U.S. activities in Burkina Faso were fully transparent and focused on countering insurgent threats. But in the Sahel, those words have begun to sound like a broken record, a phrase recycled every time a Western footprint grows heavier. What Traoré did differently was not just expose the duplicity, he acted on it. This act shattered one of the most unspoken understandings in modern geopolitics, that even when African states know they are being watched, they stay quiet for the sake of aid and stability. Traoré has made that silence impossible. He turned Burkina Faso into the stage where the continent's suppressed defiance finally spoke, loudly, publicly, and without apology. And it wasn't just symbolic. His government didn't issue vague condemnations. It issued coordinates and names. Intelligence operatives were identified, diplomatic credentials cross-checked, and a formal order of departure was handed through the U.S. Embassy. Within hours, reports began surfacing that Burkina Faso security officers were stationed near the suspected base, ensuring that no unauthorized data transfer or equipment removal would take place beyond what the government approved. The message was unmistakable. Burkina Faso is in charge of its own soil. But what makes this moment truly seismic is not the expulsion itself, but the timing and context. It comes amid a historic realignment of power in the Sahel. Mali and Niger, both members of the newly formed Alliance of Sahel States AES, have already expelled French troops and questioned U.S. influence. Burkina Faso's decision now adds another crack in the once unbreakable Western hold over the region. Let's pause for a second to say big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. For the first time, the West faces a coordinated front of African nations that see partnership as a code word for dependency. Traoré's move doesn't just isolate Burkina Faso from U.S. intelligence, it threatens to create a domino effect. If Niger, already skeptical of U.S. presence at Airbase 201, follows suit. America's Sahel strategy could collapse overnight. The stakes are monumental, and Washington knows it. Yet what most outsiders fail to grasp is that Traoré's action wasn't born out of anti-Western sentiment. It was born out of lived experience. Over the past year, his government has survived multiple assassination attempts, several of which were tied to intelligence leaks. Military insiders whisper that Traoré grew convinced that sensitive information shared during joint operations was somehow reaching hostile militias and foreign capitals alike. That betrayal hardened him. To him, the issue was not ideology, it was survival. In his televised address, Traoré hinted at this deeper wound. He spoke of protection that came with chains, and of allies who guarded our borders while spying on our hearts. The imagery was poetic, but the meaning was surgical. Burkina Faso would rather fight alone than live under invisible supervision. His tone carried no anger, only finality, the kind that makes diplomats panic because it cannot be negotiated. And while the Western press rushed to frame it as a reckless act of isolationism, African audiences heard something else entirely. Across social media, from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, comments poured in praising Traoré's courage. He was being hailed not as a disruptor, but as a defender, the first African leader in a generation willing to confront what many quietly call digital colonialism. The control of African intelligence, communication, and perception by external powers. The symbolism is powerful, a young soldier from one of the world's poorest nations standing up to a global superpower and saying, "Enough." It carries echoes of a time when leaders like Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, and Kwame Nkrumah declared that true independence cannot exist if foreign entities control the flow of information. But Traoré's ultimatum also leaves burning questions in its wake. How deep did the infiltration go? And how did something called security cooperation become a tool for control? To answer that, one must strip away the polite language of diplomacy and look at the machinery beneath it, a network that was never designed to protect Africa, but to preserve visibility for those who feared losing control over it. What the United States called partnership in the Sahel was, in practice, a sophisticated web of dependency built around information. It began after the fall of Libya in 2011, when instability spread through Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. The narrative was straightforward. Insurgent threats were growing, local militaries were under-equipped, and Western allies needed to step in. The logic was seductive, even noble on the surface. But buried in the structure of these agreements were layers of clauses that granted Western forces operational immunity, control of surveillance technology, and exclusive access to communication data. For years, these clauses were waved off as technical necessities. After all, Africa's wars against insurgencies demanded coordination. But over time, those who paid close attention realized that coordination had quietly turned into command. The flow of intelligence, who gets what, when, and why, was no longer an exchange. It became a one-way pipeline, with the stream always ending in Washington or Paris. Burkina Faso's intelligence officers started noticing this shift years ago. Information gathered during local reconnaissance would often resurface in foreign media or Western intelligence reports before it was even processed domestically. It was as though someone else had access to the country's eyes and ears. That realization, slow and unsettling, began reshaping the perception of partnership. And the system was far more intricate than most imagined. The so-called joint facilities across the Sahel were equipped with advanced surveillance platforms capable of collecting data across borders, signals intelligence SIGINT units that could intercept phone calls, track troop movements, and even monitor encrypted government communications. But crucially, the encryption keys and software licenses for these systems were held abroad, meaning the host nations, the African states footing part of the bill and offering the territory, had limited control over the very infrastructure supposedly protecting them. This is the quiet genius of neo-colonialism in the 21st century. It no longer wears uniforms. It wears login credentials. It doesn't need armies when it can read your emails. Traoré's declaration, therefore, was not an emotional outburst. It was a strategic response to a long pattern of informational subjugation. the United States and its allies in Europe had built an intelligence map of the Sahel that looked more like a colonial blueprint than a counterinsurgency network. Their bases, from Agadez in Niger to Djibouti and beyond, formed digital fences around African states, capable of watching every drone flight, every convoy, every high-level meeting. And this control didn't stop at military surveillance. The architecture extended into financial data, political movements, and media narratives. Through partnerships with international NGOs and training programs, analysts embedded themselves in sectors far removed from defense, shaping how governments perceived their own crises. It was an elegant trap. Africa became dependent on data that it did not own. But in Burkina Faso, this model began to break down the moment the new military government started questioning the motives behind intelligence sharing. Traoré's officers reportedly reviewed the agreements inherited from previous administrations and discovered clauses granting foreign operatives unmonitored access to satellite channels and encrypted frequencies. Worse still, some of these agreements were signed indefinitely, with no renewal or oversight mechanisms. In effect, foreign agencies had permanent listening privileges over Burkina Faso's communications infrastructure. This wasn't collaboration, it was surveillance colonialism under legal disguise. To ordinary Burkinabe citizens, these revelations were shocking. But to African analysts and historians, they confirmed a long-suspected continuity, the ghost of colonial oversight, resurrected in the age of data. France once ruled through administrators and soldiers. Now its successors rule through servers and intelligence liaisons. The system was modern, but the intent was ancient. Control the narrative, monitor the resistance, and preempt independence before it becomes contagious. And yet, this entire machinery depended on one fragile illusion, that African governments would never dare to expose it. That illusion died the moment Traoré went public. The symbolism of his move goes beyond geopolitics. It challenges the intellectual premise that Africa needs supervision to remain stable. Western policymakers often justify their presence in terms of preventing chaos. But what they rarely admit is that the chaos they warn of often becomes the justification for staying. The cycle is self-sustaining. Instability invites intervention. Intervention invites dependency, and dependency ensures the need for more intervention. Traoré's rejection of this cycle, beginning with the intelligence sector, is therefore not just a domestic act. It is a direct challenge to the international order that has long defined Africa as a theater rather than a player. His statement dismantles decades of soft power architecture in one blow. Burkina Faso will not trade sovereignty for security, but exposing the illusion is only half the battle. The real question is what comes after the mask is removed. If foreign partnerships can no longer masquerade as guardianship, how will Burkina Faso protect itself from the real threats, insurgency, and regional instability without the very systems it has just expelled? That question haunts both friends and foes of Traoré alike. The United States sees a vacuum forming, one that may soon be filled by other global actors waiting in the wings. But Traoré's supporters see something else, an opportunity to rebuild Africa's security from within, with partners who respect sovereignty rather than manipulate it. And that precisely is where the story turns next, toward the high-stakes gamble Traoré has now entered. Can a small, landlocked nation survive the wrath of a superpower and still rewrite the rules of power in Africa? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Traoré knows exactly what he's doing, and perhaps more importantly, what he's risking. After tearing away the mask of security cooperation, the captain has stepped into a far more dangerous arena, one where power is played not through armies, but through consequences. The first and most immediate risk is economic. Washington's leverage doesn't begin with missiles or troops, it begins with the US dollar. American aid, though often exaggerated in public perception, still lubricates much of the Sahel's fragile financial ecosystem. Humanitarian funding, intelligence equipment, food programs, and health projects are all tied in some way to US or Western mechanisms. By daring to confront that system, Traoré effectively declared that Burkina Faso is ready to live without its crutches. But can it? The United States has a history of weaponizing access, not only cutting off direct support, but quietly influencing multilateral lenders like the IMF, World Bank, and regional financial institutions to make life difficult for defiant governments. It's a playbook Africa knows too well. When Egypt under Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956, Western banks froze reserves. When Thomas Sankara resisted foreign loans in the 1980s, aid pipelines suddenly dried up. When Zimbabwe pushed for land reform, international credit vanished overnight. The instruments have changed: sanctions, trade restrictions, and financial ratings. But the tune is the same: punish independence. And yet, Traoré's tone suggests he's already accounted for that. His administration has been pushing internal reforms aimed at mobilizing domestic resources, mining royalties, state-owned agriculture, and new gold refinery revenues to reduce foreign dependency. If Washington retaliates economically, Ouagadougou seems intent on turning inward and regional, leaning on the alliance of Sahel states AES as both a political shield and an economic lifeline. That alliance, forged in defiance of Western isolation, is becoming Africa's first real experiment in collective sovereignty. By integrating their energy, defense, and trade systems, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are attempting something revolutionary: replacing external aid with internal cooperation. In this context, Traoré's expulsion of U.S. intelligence doesn't isolate Burkina Faso. It binds the AES tighter. Every Western withdrawal strengthens the argument for African interdependence. Still, the gamble isn't just economic, it's geopolitical. The U.S. intelligence network in Africa isn't merely about surveillance, it's about influence. Embedded operatives often serve as conduits of political pressure, information gatekeepers, and early warning nodes for Washington's diplomatic strategies. By ejecting them, Traoré effectively blinds one of the world's most powerful eyes in the Sahel. That won't go unanswered. The U.S. could choose subtle retaliation, diplomatic cold shouldering, cyber interference, or disinformation campaigns designed to paint Burkina Faso as unstable or insurgent. Western media narratives have already begun shifting tone. From Burkina Faso's bold independence to Burkina Faso's dangerous drift. The script is predictable. A government asserting sovereignty is labeled as authoritarian, its reforms as reckless, its leadership as volatile. But here lies the brilliance of Traoré's move. He isn't trying to win Western approval. He's trying to capture African imagination. Every headline calling him defiant makes him a hero in the eyes of those who have long felt patronized. In Africa's new political psychology, dignity sells better than diplomacy. That's why this is more than an intelligence feud. It's a battle over narrative. The West measures victory in control. Africa measures it in pride. And Traoré has mastered that currency. The footage of him delivering his ultimatum has already spread like wildfire across African social media. A young leader in uniform, unflinching, speaking not from a teleprompter but from conviction. His language wasn't bureaucratic, it was generational. He spoke to millions of Africans tired of being lectured about democracy by those who bankroll dictators elsewhere. Still, narratives don't pay for imports, and pride doesn't shield against sanctions. That's the tightrope Traoré now walks: how to transform symbolic defiance into sustainable independence. To do that, he's playing chess on multiple fronts. First, by deepening regional cooperation through the AES. Second, by expanding relations with Russia, China, and Turkey. Nations are eager to fill the vacuum left by Western withdrawal. Moscow, already active through defense cooperation in Mali and Niger, sees an opportunity in Ouagadougou's stand. Russian state media have portrayed Traoré's ultimatum as a victory for African sovereignty, while private defense contractors and energy firms eye new contracts. China, less loud but more strategic, is watching with interest. For Beijing, Burkina Faso's defiance aligns neatly with its broader Belt and Road ambitions. A continent less beholden to Western conditionality is a continent more open to multipolar partnerships. Of course, such shifts won't happen overnight. The U.S. still commands enormous leverage through its alliances, global finance systems, and diplomatic reach. But it's losing something harder to quantify: moral authority. In the past, Western influence depended as much on perception as on power. It worked because people believed it was inevitable. Traoré's defiance punctures that belief. And this is where the stakes climb higher. If Burkina Faso holds its ground and avoids collapse, it rewrites the rulebook for the global South. If it falters, it becomes the cautionary tale the West will use for a generation, a reminder of what happens when small nations challenge the big ones. Every move Traoré makes now is under a microscope, not because of what it means for one country, but because of what it represents for a continent. And yet, for all the uncertainty, one thing is undeniable. Traoré has forced the world to look at Africa differently, no longer as a chessboard where pieces move under foreign command, but as a player ready to flip the table. Do you think Africa is finally breaking free from centuries of silent control? Can Burkina Faso's bold defiance inspire the rest of the continent to follow? Let us know in the comments section. Will the old powers strike back to remind Africa who still holds the strings? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.